It has been a very eventful week in Ukraine news. What a time to choose to go on vacation. So much has happened in these 3 to 4 days that we're getting like the full extent of Trump's flip-floppity. Okay, his ability to flip-flop. And I'm not saying that this is even, the normal Trump flip-flopping where he's just like deciding something different in the middle of the night due to a news segment, though I do think the news pressure is getting to him. But it's just showing how dynamic the diplomatic situation is right now to see how we can get shifts, even though Donald Trump still has the same concerns I always had with Trump, where even if you get him on your side, in a split second, he could flip again. That threat's still there, of course, even if this somehow ends in the best case scenario. But right now, we're seeing the most pressure, at least verbal pressure, put on the Russians since Trump has got inaugurated, with him openly talking about the Russians might be dragging him along, basically using him like a chump. And the way that Republican senators have talked about it is that the Russians are trying to use us like chumps. And they're talking about it openly after 100 days of failed diplomacy. Again, Donald Trump said it was supposed to be 24 hours. Before that, even said before he get inaugurated. Then his new goalpost was 100 days. Well, that's passing by. That's gone. But by the end of this week, that's done. And we're going to pass the third goalpost that Trump has set. And so he's under pressure. But first, let's talk about what happened on the 24th. That's how far back we are in Ukraine updates. We need to talk about how Trump was talking before the Zelensky-Vatican meeting, which seems to be the big separation point for Ukraine policy within the administration, okay? Before that meeting, on the 24th, here is Donald Trump saying, Russia has made a pretty big concession. Wow, that's news to me. I have yet to hear of any concession to end the war in Ukraine and stopping short of taking the whole country. You can go listen to the audio clip if you want. You can go listen to Trump talk about it if you want to. It's the same words if you don't believe me. For whatever reason, after hearing Trump say as much nonsense as he said about the war, the $350 billion in aid, the Kursk encirclement, this shouldn't surprise you that much, but this is what he said. That by Russia giving up nothing, it is a concession simply to not conquer Kiev. The thing they failed to do at the start of the war? All the regions that they've invaded since the start of the 2022 invasion, none of which they've been able to completely get control of? Yeah, because we're not giving them all that, and he's not conquering the rest of the country. That in and of itself is a concession. See, when the Ukrainians make concessions, they make concessions like, okay, I guess we're not at the negotiating table. Okay, I guess we're going to have to concede on this big mineral deal and give up a lot of our natural wealth in order to placate the United States. Okay, we're going to concede, I guess, from the American perspective. America's saying we're now conceding NATO membership. Okay, we're also conceding American troops in Ukraine with no reciprocal demands. No, hey, you know what? No American troops in Ukraine if you promise to give back all the kidnapped children. Nothing on that. And it's just been concession, stacked upon concession, stacked upon concession, until the most recent big announcement, which was not only would there not be any land given back to Ukraine upon which has been occupied, which Trump said at the start that he was going to try to negotiate back their land as much as he could. And well, how much could he get? Zilch. Zero, according to the peace plans that are being put forward. The great art of the deal man. He's the big negotiator. 0 square kilometers. 0 square miles for the Americans, in case there's a little confusion there. So concession after concession after concession. These are real concessions. Russia, by not conquering Kiev, the thing they failed to do and have been unable to do for over 3 years now, that in and of itself is a concession. This is what I would call weak diplomacy. This is what I would call giving the Russians way too much credit, to the point where they don't need to concede anything. They just need to make demands. These are the types of things you say if you want the Russians to get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. Because if you think that they won't take you for everything they can, if they think they can, then you're naive, you're a fool, and you're letting Putin take you for granted. Now, that was on the 24th. Then, the next day, Steve Witkoff, after dodging a meeting with Ukrainians, along with Marco Rubio, in order where they were all going to meet up and they were going to have a meeting about how to end the war. Instead, America sent a lower level diplomat. Those two skipped this meeting, and then Witkoff went to Russia to have his fourth meeting with Vladimir Putin. Now I want to show you some interesting things about this interaction. If you look over, there's Steve Witkoff. Who is he supported by here? You guys see where he's supported here? He's supported by no one. He has no experts behind him. He has nobody who knows the region at this negotiating table. I guess if it was just a talk between him and Putin, you know, maybe that makes sense. But instead, oh, look at that. Putin's backed up by that guy, that guy, that guy.
Corrupt,
and I don't know how much detail I need to give you guys. Thank you so much, Blonde Bombshiller, for the YouTube membership. And can I also say, big supporter of the channel. Always appreciate BB. Not that BB, our BB, okay? These guys around him, I don't need to go into the details. All I need to tell you is that these are killers. These are the diplomatic equivalent of killers. These are people who know their stuff. These are people who know how to play hardball. These are people who know how to make their case. These are people who know the region, who know Ukraine, who know what they're doing. And they're facing off a real estate mogul who only has this position, this man right here, because he is close personal friends with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump trusts him immensely more than, say, somebody like his previous Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, or Rex Tillerson. Choose one. Remember, this is the guy who on the Tucker Carlson podcast could not name a single region that he wanted to give away to the Russians. So he was talking about giving away regions to the Russians, but he couldn't name any of the land that he was talking about giving up. This is the level of knowledge that our direct diplomat with the Russians has of the war. Would any of us be surprised to learn that he hasn't gotten any concessions? I wonder why we haven't gotten any concessions, because this is the guy fighting for us. Now, if it was somebody like Keith Kellogg, you know, I don't like Keith Kellogg too much. He describes Ukraine like a barnyard animal that needs to be beaten with wood, needs to be beaten into submission. Real quote, he said, beat him like a mule with a 2x4, a barnyard animal that needed to be beaten into submission. That's how he talks about the Ukrainians. And that's, by the way, in reference to the aid cuts that cost lives, including the ones that dropped intelligence. And what was the purpose of that? Oh, yeah, to get Ukraine to agree to the unconditional ceasefire Russia never agreed to. Okay, so that then was followed after that meeting by Donald Trump going out and saying that a deal between Russia and Ukraine is very close. Now, throughout this negotiation process, we've heard a lot of, oh, things look positive, things look good, you know, oh, we're seeing progress, even though the Russian position hasn't really budged at all, as we're about to talk about. And then we continue to just like circle, and that's how we've moved from before the war to 24 hours to 100 days. So still, same dialogue. We're very close to a deal as the Russians continue to drag their feet and stop new American aid from coming in while dragging out the war, prolonging the war. This is a diplomatic strategy by the Trump administration that prolongs the war as the Russians take advantage of our weakness, at least from their perspective. Then we had this meeting right here. That picture is legendary, and it's going to be in the history books. When you send your kids to school, this picture right here is going to be in your kids' history books. This picture right here was after the funeral of Pope Francis. Zelensky and Trump sat down in a private venue right here, hosted by the Vatican, sat one-on-one to talk the war. This right here is the only way we will get progress with Trump. That's my firm belief. The only way you're ever going to budge Trump off of that, the only way you're going to get Trump to get on any team that is relatively pro-Ukraine is by getting him away from Tulsi Gabbard, getting him away from J.D. Vance, getting him away from RFK, getting him away from the gaggle of knuckle draggers. And once you've done that and you have Trump one-on-one, I think that's an environment where you can not only make a good pitch to him, but you're not going to have people whispering in his ears, trying to drag him one way or drag him another way or mislead him. And in this environment, I think this is the only way we're going to be able to get any progress, because there's not people playing guard on the president. And it was in this environment that we started to see some change. He's just tapping me along. Well, I never thought I'd see the day. I never thought I'd see the day where the Trump administration would talk about Putin in terms of he's playing them for a fool. Now, the full quote is not he is tapping me along. The way he talks about it is he may be tapping me along. Maybe everybody was right that Putin is abusing my good diplomatic nature. Let me read you what he said on Truth Social. I don't know if we're going to read the full post. Maybe we can. Yes, let's do that instead. I think that's better. No matter what the deal I make with respect to Russia, Ukraine, no matter how good it is, even if it's the greatest deal ever made, the failing New York Times will speak badly of it. Little Peter Baker, the very biased and untalented writer for the Times, followed his editor's demands and wrote that Ukraine should get back territory, including, I suppose, Crimea and other ridiculous requests in order to stop the killing that is worse than anything since World War II. Now, none of this stuff at the start here is super important to the change in dynamic here. This is just the way Trump talks in all of his Truth Social posts about anything important. So anyone who wants to learn about, what the president might do has to listen to his ramblings about how bad the press is and ridiculous demands. But to be clear, the editor did not say that Ukraine must get Crimea back. The editor said what Trump said weeks ago, which is the president should work to negotiate as much land of theirs back as possible. Trump said he would try to do that, and apparently he failed. Because if he didn't fail, where's the land? He said that publicly. He said he would try to do it. So unless he didn't try, which would be an indictment of itself, he failed. Continuing. Why doesn't this lightweight reporter say that it was Obama who made it possible for Russia to steal Crimea from Ukraine without even a shot being fired? This narrative is breaking apart. I've seen polling from CNN that indicates that only 36% of Americans think that the president is handling Russia correctly. 36% of Americans. 39% in handling Ukraine correctly, meaning the majority of Americans do not believe he's handling this correctly. In fact, if you actually check for the percentage of Americans who thinks that this strategy will bring peace, the last poll I saw, which is like a month old now, was 27%. That means he's lost the MAGA crowd. That there's people in the MAGA crowd who's like, nah, he's not going to do it. He's not going to achieve it. Because the MAGA crowd is like roughly like 33% of the country, the people who are pretty like diehard, they're going to be with Trump like through it all. 27%. And those are old numbers before all of these recent kerfluffles, meaning that the number is probably lower, but we'll just stick with 27. Point is, the American people have no confidence. The American people don't like what he's doing to Ukraine. And the American people think that, presumably, okay, I doubt that the American people be nicer to Russia, that he's being not tough enough on Russia. If you want to dispute that we can apply that or we could extrapolate that from the data, I would ask you to review Pew Research polling data on Russia, which, while it has improved by 8 to 10 points, I think in large part due to Donald Trump's rhetoric, it's still in either the single digits or the very low double digits, as in the teens, for both Putin and Russia's approval rating in the United States. So no, I don't think it is that we are treating them too nicely. Continuing. It was also Little Peter who wrote an absolutely fawning yet terrible written biography on Obama. It was a joke. Did Baker ever criticize the Obama Crimea giveaway? No, not once. Only Trump. And I've had nothing to do with this stupid war other than early on when I gave Ukraine javelins and Obama gave them sheets. To be clear, Donald Trump didn't do anything to give Ukraine javelins. This is a lie. Congress gave them javelins. They passed a veto-proof majority to send Ukraine lethal defensive aid, and Donald Trump illegally blocked it in order to try to strong-arm the Ukrainians into giving him dirt on his political opponents, namely Hunter Biden, who did work for a Ukrainian energy company named Burisma. So, not buying it. Anyway, continuing. This is Sleepy Joe Biden's war, not mine. He's president. It's now your war. You said you would end it in 24 hours? That means you're claiming a certain amount of responsibility. You cannot claim a responsibility where you're the great peacemaker, you're the great man on top, and then all of a sudden, bleh, Anyway, let me just read through this. I could go back and forth with every little Donald Trump thing all day, and I should not be doing this. We need to get through the news. It was a loser from day one and should never have happened. It would never have happened if I was president at the time. I'm just trying to clean up the mess that was left to me by Obama and Biden. And what a mess it is. Wait, who was the president before Obama and Biden? Sorry, I just forgot. There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas. With all that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think, and this is the crucial part, it makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along. It has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying. This is the strongest language against Putin so far. It's the first indication where he hasn't said Putin is great, fantastic, wonderful, and can be trusted on this, and he can be traced basically in the idea that Putin is trustworthy enough to negotiate and you can trust the deal. This is the first time he's talked about it in a different framework where, well, maybe he is taking advantage of the United States. Well, maybe he is taking advantage of this diplomatic process. And I think as we go through the rest of the stories today, we're going to find a lot more evidence of that. Now, as for the banking or secondary sanctions, I have heard this since day one. I've heard this since day one. This is not the first time I've heard this. Trump said that he was going to be placing sanctions on Russia on day one of his second presidency. He said he was going to be placing sanctions on Russia if they failed to act on peace. It's now been 100 days. He said 24 hours. He's offered unilateral ceasefires, 30-day ceasefires. He pressured the Ukrainians with real consequences. Cutting off intelligence support, cutting off military aid, stuff that costs the lives of men in uniform. But for the Russians, we're still talking about the same consequences that have yet to be triggered since day one. Talking is talking. Acting is acting. If the Russians just think you're talking, they're not going to take you seriously. And I think in response to this, the Russians continue not to take him seriously. And we can do this both through words, talking, and actions. Let's start with actions. After Trump said this, Russia launched a massive drone attack of 150 drones. These are long-range, fixed-wing drone aircraft over Ukraine through the weekend, Saturday into Sunday. So for the last 2 days, they've been lobbing these drones in one of the larger drone attacks of the war. Now, this is, again, the same time Trump is talking about how maybe Russia doesn't really want peace. Maybe Russia isn't, really out here thriving and surviving for peace. Maybe they just want to use this as a mechanism to drag out the war. So he says, hey, stop firing these missiles. Stop firing these bombs into civilian areas. He needs to stop. Stop is one thing he literally said. Stop, Putin. Stop. And another message. Stop. Just blank. Like, stop, Putin. Like he was saying, swiper, no swiping. Putin, no bombing. Putin, no bombing. And this was his response. Now, mind you, this isn't just bad for Ukraine. This is bad for Trump. I mean, the reason we have those polling numbers that have Trump low is because as he talks about, oh, we're close to a deal, bodies of Ukrainian children are coming on TV getting bombed in playgrounds, which does not, peaceful behavior entice. So this is the actions of the Russians in response to this. And I wanted to make sure that, we try to have a connection to the ground. Here is a woman from Konstantinivka, an old babushka. Konstantinivka, I've spent a lot of time there. Going to like the Oko gas station on my way to other points of the front. I've stayed there and, resided there as kind of like a base camp on a few occasions while doing a lot of embeds in the region. Really good people there, nice community, supportive people. In Konstantinivka, it was one of the cities that was really hit super, super, super hard by these big drone attacks. Here is one of these babushkas talking about how she has to survive these drone attacks in order to try to bring food and water to those still in the city who can no longer walk and get those supplies for themselves. I've been under drones 5 times already. I'm helping people, carrying bread. You're the ones delivering bread, but you can barely walk yourself. How do you manage? Well, I climb up to the 3rd, 4th floors and bring them water too. I carry purified water. because some people can't walk anymore, and their children, they've left. Are there really people like that? Yes. Where would they go if they can't walk? I can even take you to show you right now. There's a man who barely moves and a woman who crawls on her knees. You go into her apartment, it's clean. She crawls and keeps everything tidy, and I bring them bread. Whatever the soldiers give me, I carry to them. Yesterday, they gave me some frozen liver. I brought it to them. They gave me a little piece of something. I wouldn't eat myself, but I take it to them. I feel so sorry for them. As the United States cuts off U.S. aid and our support for them on a humanitarian basis, these are the people that pick up the slack. These are the babushkas that we're putting the humanitarian burden on. Also, I do want to throw out there, I know this is a little, I'm getting a little ahead of myself about cutting off of support, but I do want to also throw out there that right now it looks like that Ukraine is also losing a certain amount of cybersecurity support from the Trump administration, as Trump has cut funding for Ukraine's cyber defense against Russia's attacks. Meaning, not only are the missile attacks and the drone attacks making headway, but they're also going to have less protection for Russian cyber attacks that could bring down the electrical grid, that could target their, tax collecting revenue, it could target their government infrastructure that's necessary for the functioning of the state. Basically, many, 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 many important sections of Ukrainian society, important institutions in Ukrainian society that are necessary for the state to function. Now, the reaction to all these attacks, the reactions to all these bombings, if you go to, for example, Europe, you're going to get stuff like this from Boris Johnson, somebody who is traditionally seen as somebody who's, at least, now I don't want to say he's Trump-esque, but there's a certain way where he's Trump-esque. And he's certainly not somebody who would immediately say this is the enemy of Donald Trump, as somebody who represents the British right. It's time for Donald Trump to take the boot off Ukraine's neck and put the squeeze on Putin. To take the boot off of Ukraine's neck. Aussie, thank you so much for the membership. What language? Not, hey, we need to support Ukraine more. Hey, Donald Trump, you need to understand X, Y, and Z. No. Take the boot off of Ukraine's neck. This plays very well domestically. Just like, the chest-pounding response to the tariffs in Canada has played great for Mark Carney. This type of stuff in one of the countries in Europe that has the most support for Ukraine, which is the case in Britain, this plays well. This plays well with the domestic audience and is adding pressure. And it's not just him. Here's Senator John Kennedy talking about Putin breaking every promise he's made to Trump. Basically, he's talking about Trump, even though he doesn't say it directly. He talks about America being taken advantage of and being made a chump. Who is leading the United States?
I haven't been able to catch your streams lately, so I'm glad I finally did. Thanks for everything you do for Ukraine and journalism at large. It isn't going unnoticed.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Pudding. That sounded like I was flirting, but that's just your name. Thank you for the sub. But here is diehard Trump supporter, Senator Kennedy, somebody who will go on the Senate floor and defend that man 10 ways from Sunday, doing everything he can to defend him. Here is him talking about how Putin has broken every promise he's made to Trump, whether it be on the civilian ceasefire, whether it be on the energy ceasefire, whether it be on the, how much he desires peace, and now the unilateral ceasefire and the unconditional ceasefire keeps getting kicked down the road. Listen to this. This isn't like on some liberal news network. This is on Fox.
All right. Joining us now, Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday. All right, let me start there. You hear that these attacks continue overnight, although President Trump has said to President Putin, you got to stop it, knock it off. There are brand new polling numbers that we've got out today that the American people do not think President Trump is handling this well. His job approval on handling Russia and Ukraine is at 36% and 39%, respectively.
Fox News with Shannon Bream. The American people don't support Trump on this. Just clearly saying it. Open, adamant. Here's the numbers. Here you can see it decreasing month by month. That's from March. That's from April. That's a month-by-month decrease of like 5-6%. Each month that passes, more and more people lose faith in Trump. That's why there's such an emphasis on trying to get this done now in Trump's mind. I think he knows that that's going to slowly crawl down, and the more Putin is the main the main road bump in the way, the harder it is to deny that it ain't the Ukrainians really dragging their feet.
Is it foolish to think that Putin does want peace, and will he be emboldened if part of this deal includes giving him territory?
I think, Shannon, America is paying the price right now for President Biden's appeasement. The Biden people believed in diplomacy.
Again, the whole thing is just scapegoat Biden, scapegoat Biden, scapegoat Biden. Biden's, his conciliatory policy is appeasement. Trump has a policy of appeasement towards the Russians for the first 100 days of his presidency. That's all it's been. Cutting off aid, cutting off intelligence support, not including Ukraine at the table, conceding NATO membership, conceding U.S. troops on the ground, conceding... I'm trying to concede Crimea, even though it's not his thing to concede. You would need to go through the Ukrainian Rada. It's like Zelensky literally cannot just declare we're giving up Crimea. It has to go through the Rada. It has to go through their parliament. That's baked into the Constitution. It's going to be kind of hard for the Ukrainian government to argue, we're fighting for democracy and we're fighting for our people. If it's like, well, we're going to ignore the people's vote, we're going to ignore that. He can't do. He literally constitutionally cannot do it. It'd be like asking Donald Trump, could you please abolish taxes and then we can have this deal? No, just go around Congress if you could. I mean, Trump, with his record, but that's not how it's supposed to work. It's a policy of appeasement. I mean, come on. I mean, I'm not saying that Biden, Obama, that all of these guys haven't failed on Ukraine in some way, but coming from a Trump defender, the word appeasement, not really.
First, last, and always. We're in a knife fight with Russia.
Because I was of the opinion, and somebody just brought this up in chat, didn't Vance say that Biden didn't try diplomacy and that was the problem? So how is it a policy of appeasement if Biden didn't even try diplomacy, according to J.D. Vance? There's not a consistent message here. And the reason why is because people like Kennedy don't really agree with J.D. Vance's foreign policy viewpoints, and now we're starting to see that surface.
Believed in diplomacy, first, last, and always. We're in a knife fight with Russia and China and Iran, and the Biden people wanted to quote Socrates to them. I see what you...
If we're in a knife fight, just a proposal, why don't we take a gun?
To them. I see what
Thanks,
you
T-Rex.
see. Here's what I see. Putin has reneged on every promise that he's made to President Trump. His latest proposal is, well, nothing. He wants to keep all the territory that he's taken. He wants to prohibit Ukraine from joining NATO, and he wants America and Europe to stop helping Ukraine. I think that Putin thinks that America has taken the bullet train to Chunktown. I think he thinks we're afraid of him. He has jacked around President Trump at every turn. He has disrespected our...
That's not an image I needed.
...president. I don't think it's going to get any better until we make it clear to Mr. Putin that we are willing to turn him and his country into fish food. And I'm not talking about nuclear weapons or nuclear war. I would start with oil, which I will be glad to talk about if you want.
He's now, as weird as it sounded, the jerking around Trump at every opportunity. Maybe I should stop with the hand movements when I'm saying that. That is not just an indictment. Oh, Biden. Oh, America's being taken to Trump town. That would suggest that Trump is allowing him to jerk. That this is a mutual jerk where Trump's leaning into it while Putin's going to town. I'm not helping, and I realize that. So let's move on, because as this public pressure is building, okay, if you're Donald Trump, you're looking over to Moscow hoping that there's going to be some signal, some glimmer to make it look like there's an avenue forward here diplomatically. And then Sergei Lavrov opened his mouth. Sergei Lavrov is the Russian foreign minister. He has been Putin's foreign minister for quite some time now, for the entirety of this war. And I wanted to read you what he said in response to the American and Ukrainian demand for an unconditional, unilateral 30-day ceasefire, which has been the demand ever since Trump cut off aid to the Ukrainians to make it the demand, which the Russians did not respond to, did not give and reciprocate, and then there was no pressure put on them. Again, this is usually there would be a response to something like that. But let me read you some of the things that has been stated. We have no secret regarding our position on a war settlement. Russia proceeds from the premise that Kiev's non-accession to NATO, as well as reaffirming to be neutral and non-aligned status as per the 1990 Declaration of Ukraine state sovereignty, these factor from one of the two pillars for a final settlement to the Ukraine crisis. That's how they call it, the Ukraine crisis. They don't call it the Ukraine invasion because it's not an invasion, it's special military. The Ukraine crisis. Ukraine crisis that would meet Russia's security interests. Okay, so no NATO membership, and they have to declare neutrality. They have to declare neutrality, non-aligned status, meaning they can't join any alliance blocks to, power balance against the Russians, all in line with their declaration of state sovereignty. Now, all of a sudden, agreements from the 90s matter. Okay. The second pillar consists of overcoming the legacy of the neo-Nazi regime, which took power in... This isn't serious.
A curd is a curd.
This is me paying you to stop overtly talking about yanking off Trump. Please, my heart can only take so much.
I might go back just to incite more donations. The second pillar consists of overcoming the legacy of the neo-Nazi regime. Russia's sending neo-Nazi brigades like Rusich to go denazify Ukraine. They're saying, hail Adolf, while marching around, committing war crimes. And those are the anti-fascist heroes that are supposed to liberate Kiev and bring anti-fascism to new heights. That's not even to talk about the fascism problem in Russia. But again, we're back to the propaganda talking points of 2014. The neo-Nazi regime, which took power in Kiev after the February 2014 push, including the initiative by its proprietors to eradicate and cancel, in both physical and legislative terms, everything Russian, be it the Russian language, media, cultural traditions, or the canonical Orthodox faith, meaning that this would seem to be a demand that all of the language laws in Ukraine be revoked. So all the stuff that you have to broadcast this much Ukrainian on TV, it can't be said. The request for, public employees to speak Ukrainian at government buildings before speaking Russian if requested, which was the language law, by the way. That has to be done away with. All the efforts to promote Ukrainian over Russian because they're trying to reverse historical damage done to the language and to the culture through Russification. All of that has to be done away with. That's no longer a Ukrainian matter. Ukrainians' domestic cultural issues, they are now Russia's business. Now, if Ukraine's going to go over the Russians, say, you got to teach Ukraine here, you got to teach Ukrainian there. No, of course not. Of course not. But Ukraine has to. Be it the Russian language, media, cultural traditions, or the canonical Orthodox faith. Meaning, this is also a demand by the Russians to allow the Russian Orthodox Church back into Ukraine. Allowing Kirill, the guy who said that if you go to Ukraine and kill Ukrainians, you'll go to heaven, allow him to continue to operate religious institutions inside Ukraine. Now, technically, if they really wanted to allow the Russian Orthodox Church back into Ukraine, all they would have to do is stop the invasion. Because the way that the law is written, it says any nation that is invading me, if there's a religion based out of its capital, that religious organization cannot be in Ukraine. Not Christianity, not Orthodoxy, but specifically the Russian Orthodox Church, the Russian branch of Orthodoxy. The international recognition of Crimea, Sevastopol, the DPR, so this is Donetsk, the LPR, Luhansk, and Kherson, and Zaporizhia as part of Russia. Mind you, they don't control all of Donetsk. They don't control Pokrovsk. They don't control Konstantinivka. They don't control all of Chasiv Yar. They don't control all of Toretsk. They don't control Slovansk. They don't control Svetohirsk. wait, no, not Sveta here. Sloviansk. They don't control a bunch of different locations. Dobropila, all these different locations. But that has to be given over, as well as a city of 700,000 people in Zaporizhia, as well as Kherson, the location where they're currently hunting in the human safari. Google it yourself, the hunting of civilians. Now, all of these regions have to be handed over. All of these good defensive positions have to be given up. That is their position. This is a non-starter. All the commitment Kyiv assumes must be legally binding, contain enforcement mechanisms, and be permanent. Demilitarizing and denazifying Ukraine is also on the agenda, along with lifting sanctions, withdrawing lawsuits, and canceling arrest warrants, as well as the return of Russian assets subjected to the so-called freeze in the West. Denazification. What does denazifying in Ukraine really mean? Because, I mean, they're fine with Nazis, as long as it's their Nazis. The Russians are fine with Nazis. They appoint them into occupied positions in Ukraine. They make them senators in occupied Zaporizhia, where they go online and compare black people to gorillas and monkeys and all this stuff all the time. You can go and check it anytime. Social media is open. You can go look at them comparing Lloyd Austin to a stabbed and lynched gorilla and trying to make political points. Those are the people that are going to come and denazify Ukraine. Those are the people that are going to come to Ukraine and end all the fascism. What does this really mean? It probably means, as the Russians have requested before, a change in the government in Kyiv. When they talk about elections, what they want, because they don't care about elections. You think Russia cares about democracy? You think they care about, oh, we need to make sure there's a free and fair election and that the liberal values are up? Yeah, no, of course not. It's about changing those in power, because Zelensky will not concede on Ukraine's national interests, and maybe, just maybe, someone else will. Now, there's always the possibility that Zelensky just wins again. And if he does, do you think that's going to change the Russians too? Well, okay, now that he's been elected again, I guess we agree he's the duly elected. No! Zelensky was duly elected before, and they call him like the illegitimate ruler of Ukraine. You think him being elected again is going to change anything? Especially if he still stands up for Ukraine's key issues? And look at these other things. The lifting of the sanctions. Russia can expand their war economy. Withdrawing lawsuits and canceling arrest warrants, meaning the people who committed war crimes get to go away. Returning Russian assets, meaning we're giving Russia the money that we currently have control of and have frozen. Demilitarizing, meaning Ukraine will not have the weapons and means to defend itself, let alone the alliance structures that would deter a future invasion. This is a non-starter. This is not a serious proposal that the Ukrainians are going to take and look at and say, okay, let's see where we can work here. The Ukrainians are not going to give up Zaporizhia. They're not going to give up Kherson. They're not going to give up any of these territories that Russia has not already taken control of. And they're not going to recognize it either. I mean, they're talking... The rumor was, and the reports were, that Trump wanted them to recognize Crimea. They're asking for recognition of everything and withdrawals and demilitarization, so they can't defend themselves anymore. Under this plan, they would get to be crossing the Dnieper River. They would be crossing from the east in Ukraine over the Dnieper River, their strongest natural defense. This is not a serious proposal. To have Trump go out there and do the song and dance on your behalf, trying to get people to believe that, a deal can be made, and then for them to do these 150 drone attacks after Trump told them to stop, and then respond after that with basically the same unmovable, uncompromising demands that the Ukrainians will never accept. To entertain this is prolonging this diplomatic crisis.
Different is Russian to Ukrainian as far as language. Why is this a talking point? I am Puerto Rican and we speak deep Spanish. Nothing against the Spanish, but deep meaning a thicker version of the language verbally.
Okay, we can take a quick break to try to explain this. So they have the same alphabet. So, for example, this on my arm says stalker, yeah? And in Ukrainian and in Russian, it would be the same. Because all those letters, the C makes the, I don't know if I need to teach you guys the alphabet right now, but the C makes the S sound, the whatever. You can go learn A, B, C, D, Ukrainian version. You can go do that if you want. but there's key differences in how words are said, and there's actually a lot of similarities between and shared words and kind of language between the Poles and Ukrainians, because the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had made its way into Ukraine and had cultural influences there that still hold to this day, even if the Poles and the Ukrainians tend to, clash at times, both socially and other ways historically. But the point is that there is actually a lot more similarities between Polish and Ukrainian than many people give it credit for, and it shows that Ukrainian is its own separate language with pretty vast differences. In fact, one thing that I have seen many times, and I've asked soldiers about this before, is that the Ukrainians can speak Russian pretty well. At least most of them can speak Russian pretty well, and so sometimes when Russian soldiers try to break through and they get a little lost, they'll be like they'll tell them to come over here. You're like, Tavarish, over here, and they'll drag them over and then put a gun on them and say, sorry, buddy, you're POW now, tricking them with their own language. The Russians can't speak Ukrainian. And so the Ukrainians will actually have certain words that Russians are really not good at saying, but they're in the Ukrainian language. And when trying to check if somebody's a Russian soldier or not, there has been reports that Ukrainians have tried to use these words to basically test if they know the language. You can go, there's a lot of stories about this. Actually, my next video I'm going to release on my main channel, where I interview some convict soldiers with the 59th Skaval Battalion. Battalion's the right word. They actually retell a story. Their commander, Baluk, actually told me a story about it. I asked him about it and wanted to hear about it. So I hope that sufficiently answered your question. And I think other people are talking about it in chat right now. So if you wanted more specifics, I'm sure they can help you as well. Okay, so this is a non-starter. So you have physical actions that are undermining Trump's diplomatic efforts. You've got diplomatic statements like this, which shows a completely unbudging Russia that is not moving its position whatsoever, as Trump says things like, oh, we're so close to peace, oh, it's right around the corner. And then this is the stuff we get, which everyone who knows the war knows this is nothing. This moves us no closer. So what does Putin do? Because the last thing he wants to do is lose the opportunity to drag this war out and prolong the war without American support for Ukraine by entertaining the diplomatic effort, or by getting the best terms possible for a settlement where the United States pressures Ukraine to concede things it otherwise would not have, and basically surrender on a lot of the terms that would be unmovable. That's their two objectives here. You mess up on getting that great deal, well, then at least you were able to stop Ukraine from getting all this aid, and so you can just continue the war as was. And so when you look at that from a distance and you start to see all this from the office of the presidency, now that you're up close, at the distance, maybe you think you could do something, but then you get up close, it's a little difficult. It's a little difficult, as Trump has found. As you can see, a frustrated Trump privately concedes ending the war is harder than he thought. So what is Putin to do? What is Putin to do? Well, he offered a 3-day ceasefire. Hey, that's better than the Easter ceasefire that, was respected on some points of the front, but on other points of the front wasn't respected. So even their own ceasefire they violated. But that's more than 30 hours. That's 3 days. That's 72 hours. Wow, okay, so have the guns stopped? No, because it's a 3-day ceasefire next month. It's a 3-day ceasefire between the days of May 8th and May 10th to commemorate Russia's victory in World War II, along with the rest of, the former Soviet bloc countries, is celebrating that. And so they're using the moment to say, look, we're doing a unilateral ceasefire for those 72-hour periods to show, and this is what they said, their humanitarian concerns. Their humanitarian concerns. All those concerns that Putin have that are of a humanitarian nature. You can think of one. Sure, name one for me. There wasn't a lot of humanitarian concerns at Bucha or Izium or at any of the cancer wards that were any of the, what about the nursing home in Sumy that was bombed? I saw that one. That was awful. It was awful. Humanitarian concerns. Go look in here, Son, for some humanitarian concerns. So obviously, it's not humanitarian concerns. So what is it? Why is Putin offering a 3-day ceasefire? And why wouldn't he just do it right away? Why would you delay it into then? And well, Victory Day is, and I'm just being blunt, it's a cult in Russia. Victory Day is not just a celebration of winning World War II anymore. Victory Day has become an opportunity for militarized language in order to use the Second World War as a weapon to attack those who marched with them against fascism. While it's very dark to think that somebody would use the legacy of their shared grandfathers to then go and use it to bomb the great-grandchildren of those you fought arm in arm with against fascism, that is what Victory Day has become. And if you go look at the last Victory Day parades, which have a lot less armored vehicles than they used to, by the way, I wonder why that is. It's always this type of militarized language since the war started, in references to the war. It's Nationalism Day, as Sepson just put in chat. So I think that part of it is to reinforce that idea around victory. So it is, I think, somewhat cultural, somewhat, for the domestic audience in Russia, to show, hey, look, Putin really does want peace. It's those unreasonable Ukrainians who are just not accepting our beautiful ceasefires. But I think it's mainly aimed at trying to appease Trump. Saying wait, I know, I hear that you might be close to having consequences for us, but if you just wait another 9-10 days, maybe we could do a ceasefire for 72 hours then. Prolonging the war, prolonging the diplomacy, prolonging the conflict while delaying aid, continuing it, kicking the can down the road for 10, 11, 12 more days where thousands will be killed and injured, just so we can have the ceasefire be symbolic. We could do the ceasefire now, save lives today, but no, we need the pomp, we need the pomp and celebration, we need the we need to have during our ceasefire, we need to make sure that everybody doesn't get too demilitarized in our society. So please look at the marching soldiers. Now, when I saw this worried me. This worried me because I thought this is the type of stuff that Trump, wanting a way out, wanting to believe that he can, salvage this, wanting that Nobel Peace Prize, would grab this and hug it and clutch onto it and say, look, guys, see, Putin we can still rumble with him. We can still figure something out. We can still get this moving, boys. We can still do something here. That's what I was worried about. That's not the response we got.
Morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Here is how the Trump administration, or specifically, the White House spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt, who, chief liar for the Trump administration. I'm just saying, she's shameless. When you go back in the day and you watch Sean Spicer, some of the previous, press secretaries, they'll say a lie for Trump that's pretty blatant. The crowd sizes, I remember, was the comparison that I think Tim Miller brought up recently. You could see shame in his eyes. There's no shame in this woman's eyes. And I think that's what makes her perfect for Trump. Now, White House dismisses Putin's temporary truce announcement, says Trump wants permanent ceasefire. I understand Vladimir Putin this morning offered a temporary ceasefire. The president has made it clear he wants to see a permanent ceasefire first to stop the killing and stop the bloodshed. They didn't take the bait. Or at least Caroline Leavitt didn't take the bait. Now, maybe that will change in the future. Maybe J.D. Vance will decide he wants to add his take into the mix. Maybe Tulsi Gabbard, is going to be heard off in some meeting. Maybe RFK will send out a tweet or two. I doubt any of them will want to directly undermine the president, though, considering that it's not the expertise that any of them have shown in their field that has gotten them into their position. So they want a permanent ceasefire. Well, that's difficult if your goal is to prolong the war. And I do want to throw out there that the way the Russians have talked about a possible ceasefire and a continuing ceasefire of this style, that here the Ukrainian, Ukrainian foreign minister says, if Russia truly wants peace, it must cease fire immediately. Why wait until May 8th? If the fire can be ceased now And since my any date for 30 days, so it is real, not just a parade, Ukraine is ready to support a lasting, durable, and full ceasefire. And this is what we are constantly proposing for at least 30 days. This right here, this, if we can keep this position, this is saying we will not get dragged on this anymore. We were not going to get dragged along in this process. We're not going to be made trumps of, as Senator Kennedy made it, as he stated it. And you must ceasefire now. Now look, all of these are just words. We could talk about the Russian bombings earlier, but all of these are just words. What matters is actions. What matters is the President of the United States making clear through his actions, not his words, that he will add pressure to the Russians, whether through secondary sanctions, trying to further shoot down the price of oil, if that really is a strategy, even though I think that was, I don't necessarily know if it's a direct threat, but it could be. Whatever it is, he has to do something to let them know that he's serious. You know, the Kremlin papers will talk about it as undiplomatic, et cetera, this, et cetera, that. But if Trump doesn't make it clear that if you continue down this pathway, Putin, that it's going to get worse for you than if you were to just step off the train now, your train might derail in the future if you don't get off now, then he's going to keep on going along the tracks. He has no reason not to. He's been given zero reason to back off. Trump needs to give him a reason to back off. And so now Zelensky gets to play peacemaker. Zelensky is the one in public getting to tell the world stuff like this. We in Ukraine never wanted a single second of this war. Back on March 11th, we responded positively to the American proposal for a full ceasefire. We made our own proposal to Russia bilaterally, to halt strikes at least on civilian targets. We also proposed making the Easter ceasefire full and extending it for 30 days. Russia has consistently rejected everything and continues to manipulate the world, trying to deceive the United States. See, the message he's putting out there is, Trump, don't let him trick you. Don't let him deceive you. And what is Trump talking about afterwards? Getting dragged along. I think Zelensky got something in his head, man. Now, yet again, another attempt at manipulation. For some reason, everyone is supposed to wait until May 8th before ceasing fire just to provide Putin with silence for his parade. We value human lives, not parades. That's why we believe, and the world believes, that there is no reason to wait until May 8th. The ceasefire should not just be for a few days, only to return to killing afterwards. It must be immediate, full, and unconditional for at least 30 days to ensure it's secure and guaranteed. This is the foundation that could lead to real diplomacy. We reaffirm this proposal. The American proposal also remains on the table. Russia knows exactly what it needs to do and how to respond to genuinely cease fire. Before Trump threw this at Zelensky and he eventually batted it off saying, fine, I agree to your 30-day ceasefire, there were a decent amount of world leaders who did think that actually Zelensky was the main sticking point, that Zelensky might be making ridiculous demands, and for somebody who wants the complete liberation of his territory, which isn't a ridiculous demand, there's a question about realism in the immediate future, but that's not a ridiculous demand for a country to have its own internationally recognized borders. But the idea was that Zelensky was delaying this process, maybe dragging his feet, because he has not been able to achieve those demands. And this shattered that idea. And those people have to come to terms with the fact that Zelensky agreed to civilian ceasefire. Zelensky agreed to the energy ceasefire. Zelensky agreed to the 30-day ceasefire, unconditional, which the Russians rejected, and even their piffy 30-hour ceasefire, which wasn't even respected along the whole front line. At what point can you at what point do you have to just acknowledge the truth as it is in front of you? And Trump might have to, but old habits die hard. Trump tells The Atlantic that Putin would be fine in peace negotiations. President Donald Trump told The Atlantic magazine that Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to be fine in the peace negotiations between the Kremlin and Ukraine, even as Trump's rhetoric towards Putin has grown increasingly hostile as the U.S. president pushes for an end to the ongoing war. Look, there is still an effort to try to get Putin on board with the ceasefire, even though right now that looks not likely. And so I understand there's some diplomatic effort to be like, oh, I think we can still get Putin. But saying stuff like this is going to blow up in your face, just like how the approval rating, not only across the board, is blown up in Trump's face, but also has blown up on this specific issue. And if you continue to tell people, oh, come on, Putin will be fine, and they're like, okay, and then they turn on the TV and they see missile hitting kindergarten, they see missile hitting hospital, they see missile hitting nursing home. Oh, well, that doesn't seem fine. That doesn't seem very fine to me. And I don't actually think them just saying we won't conquer Kiev is a particularly big concession at all. I mean, if we were invaded by China, would we take, oh, okay, well, we get to keep Washington, D.C. We just got to give up the West Coast and demilitarize. And no more American armed forces. Marine Corps is gone. I mean, come on. And as Trump is trying to find some way to make this work, while also trying to make sure he's not made a fool of, the Europeans continue to react. Here is the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius. Fun name to say, by the way. Trump demands for Ukrainian territorial concessions go too far. Go too far. So not only is Trump dealing with the domestic pressure, the media pressure, and just the fact that the Russians are not dancing the dance to make him look good sufficiently with all these kids blowing up. See, in Russia, maybe for Putin, it's hard to imagine. But, I mean, at some point, he should have had a press that was somewhat adversarial to him. Should understand that, if you blow up a dead kid, that's pretty scary television. But when you can control the media in Russia, maybe you get disconnected from that a little bit. Either way, though, Trump's demand for Ukrainian territorial concessions go too far. The Europeans throwing themselves in the mix. And what the Germans said after this, and this is not in the headline, is not only are the official recognition of Russian annexations too far, which makes sense that the Europeans would not want to redefine that type of law in Europe, but that if Trump pulls out, that if Trump abandons Ukraine, Germany will continue to supply Ukraine. Meaning that they're basically saying, look, if Trump decides to break rank, we will go on without him. We are not going to use our diplomatic force to pressure the Ukrainians. We're going to use all of our force right now to try to support the Ukrainians as they're trying to find other ways to make up the 155 millimeter shell difference that has now been created by the United States pulling back. Grassroots Hegemon, thank you so much for the gifted 10. And look, it's not just the Germans that are trying to make up the difference. Look at this. France is hyping up and continuing to expand its weapons industry. And currently, 90% of their artillery exports, of their 155 millimeter shells, are going to Ukraine. 90%. Talk about prioritizing Ukraine over, defense purchase commitments. My goodness. But that's because it's their immediate security interest to help Ukraine have the best hand possible, not only generally speaking, but especially right now. And that means more strength on the front. That means more artillery shells on the front. You want to stop the Russians from taking Pokrovsk? You want to stop the Russians from pushing forward their advantage and rewriting European standards and laws? Well, you got to support them with force. You got to support them with something physical. Because if you don't, how are the Russians going to take you seriously? So I would one-up Trump. Trump should not just institute sanctions. The way it should go is it should be a 1-2 punch. First wave is for him to deliver on what he said before to make himself taken seriously, and that is secondary sanctions and the tightening of the financial screws when the Russian economy is already showing cracks, make those cracks bigger. And then you compound that with an announcement that you're now entering preliminary discussions on a new Ukrainian aid package. Or if you just want the quick W, just say you're going to accept Ukraine's offer to sell them 10 Patriot systems for $15 billion. Which then Trump can not only say, look, I'm supporting Ukraine. I'm saying, I finally, I've woe is me. I will not be dragged off into this charade. But he can also say that he finally got the Ukrainians to pay for it. So he can get a double W. Whether he takes it or not, that's a totally separate question. But God knows he needs it, as Donald Trump has the lowest approval rating of any president in his first 100 days in 80 years. According to AP, Donald Trump is in the 30s. He is in the 30s. His honeymoon period, his grace period, his first 100 days is not over, and Donald Trump is in the 30s. And if you think this is an outlier, can I say that CNN polling had him at 41, and even the favorite polling of the right and the polling that, like Atlas Intel and other poll, they all have him down. There's no poll that has him up. There's some that'll have him maybe to the mid 40s. Is the highest I've seen. I think 44 is the highest I've seen from a credible pollster, maybe 45, but all of them have him down. And this one has him at 39. If you want to reverse those numbers, you got to change your behavior. Oh, I should also mention that Trump does have the best excuse of all time. When I said it was going to end the war in 24 hours, I was joking.